which came with this percentage. So there's a high percentage of remembering for these participants. On the other hand, for SenseCam participants, it was actually 60% of the individuals that, that experienced knowing more so than remembering, guessing, and not knowing. And so what I took and interpreted this as was that SenseCam, when you're interacting with SenseCam data, you're doing more perceptual types of recollection. So a lot of the cues in the SenseCam data are already so rich that you're kind of explaining a lot of the things that are already available there. But for Activity Trails and LiveScribe, a lot of the data, as you saw, were pictures of screen configuration, were pictures of images that were drawn. So those are more abstract things that we need to infer and reflect more into understanding what was going on in our past. So my hypothesis is basically that preliminarily, we reconstruct less when there's less richness, which suggests that less richness leads to a richer narrative. And for our lab, this is kind of important because we're interested in how we can help resume activities that we kind of leave to the side and we want to reconnect with in the future. So that's one application for this preliminary finding, but a lot more research needs to be done because after all, it was only a year of research and a quarter of data collecting, so a lot more could be done. But now Brendan is going to be explaining his part of the research.
Thanks, Nastasha. All right, so for mine, I titled mine Event Segmentation in the Wild. I kind of used Hutchins' idea of actually analyzing things out in the real world as opposed to taking things in the lab and kind of generalizing from there. So life is full of data. We just kind of have a vast assortment of things everywhere that we can kind of life log and add to our kind of growing repertoire of everything we can access. So one of the things that you have to figure out what to do is what to keep track of. So like we have our physical objects, we have our computer programs, things running. We also have our written notes, things like that. So in order to kind of convert all that stuff in a digital format, if you do that, you have a lot of data. You have to figure out some way to analyze it or some way how to sort through it and get to what's important. So you have the problem of, with the life logging tools, like you have the SenseCam, now in addition to having the images that you might have already been getting from a camera, you have all this sensor data that's telling you how fast you were moving or what the temperature was or different things like that in addition to that. So you have to figure out how to get through all this data as well. So event segmentation, breaking activity into kind of meaningful chunks, was an idea of a way to kind of sort through this data and to kind of store it in a fashion that's accessible and you can use it. So one of the examples that they have is someone pitching a tent. So here's like one of the first steps where someone will break it up. So you have like the next step where they're setting out the ground cloth, and then they just kind of keep going until you have a whole activity that was segmented into different portions. And so there's been a bunch of research done on highly stylized activities like this, and they found that people typically segment in very reliable patterns and are kind of reliable across viewers, so everyone kind of does it the same way. And so they've generalized this to be able to, you can write a computer algorithm that'll do this, and that way you can run the program and it'll automatically segment the data you've collected. And so it seems to be reliable across individuals, and it could be this great solution for organizing the complex data set, since a computer can do it. But it's only reliable at times. You have problems where if the segmenter has a different intent than another one, they might have a different outcomes. There's been a study done that if someone's trying to segment data but they're looking at forming an impression of the personality of the person in the video, they segment much differently than someone who's watching the video and segmenting it while trying to learn the task they're doing. So it might be a solution for organizing the complex data. If it's dependent on the person that's doing the segmenting, then it may vary dramatically. And also there's been very little studies done on actually analyzing someone who's segmenting their own data. And so a computer can do it sometimes if it's in the correct format and everything is very like simplistic and stylized. So there's been some field studies done that kind of throw a little mud on the field. You have one study that has 4 interruptions per hour they found with individuals, which it kind of breaks up a lot of activities then. And so one of the questions, though, is that are these the observers that are seeing these interruptions, or is it the people that are actually doing the task? Do they see them as interruptions as well? So they found that 64% of these interruptions were beneficial in some manner, providing the person with more information on the task they were doing, or just kind of bringing them back into the context of maybe being more efficient at whatever they're working on. But at the same time, 40% did not resume that activity, which could be seen as beneficial or not. Another study found that you only spend 3 minutes per task in a very high, fast-paced work environment. So there's a lot of interruptions there, which could cause a lot of problems trying to segment this type of data. And so, and then again, like I said, your intent influences your segmentation. So that could also have a big play in this. So rationale for my project was, is this useful with real data as opposed to these highly stylized videos? And then are events really reliable across individuals with this real data? And so then, do the individuals see this as interruptions when it's their own data, or is it just when people are observing it from an outside perspective that it's seen as an interruption as opposed to just the continuous activity? And then when you're segmenting your own data, how different is that compared with someone that's segmenting your data that didn't take the data? So this is an example of the SenseCam presenter showing one of the activity trails, and this is the example with the LiveScribe data and an example with the SenseCam data. And so on the bottom you can see the little toolbar that tells you information about the segmentation. So here you can see the point you are in the data, and then this is an actual segment. So the different colors are representing different segments that someone's done. So the instructions I gave for my task were break the data up into meaningful pieces. I want to be very general. I didn't want to bias them and give them ideas of how to break it up. I wanted them to go through and try to figure out what they would do that would be meaningful to them. So one of the strategies I found some people use, it was about 50%, was they would initially look through the data and try to figure out what was going on when it wasn't their own data set.
So I guess what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go through the entire thing. Because I like to see the whole thing before I start piecing it together. And then I'll try to piece them however I see it from the events that occurred. Looks like a party. Okay, it's definitely a party, so I have beer pong table. Oh, I know what this is. This is down that Ariba complex, I forget, it's a little playa or something. Looks like old people. Mid-20s.
So this was an example where he went through and started looking through the data first to figure out kind of what's going on before he goes back and goes through and segments it. So this would kind of give him an idea of possibly how to break it up. So it was dependent on the person, not the data set, whether people would actually look through it first. About 50% would go through the data the first time and then go back and segment it, and the other half would just go through and start from the beginning and just try to segment it without necessarily knowing what's going on. And I thought it was going to be dependent on how complex the data was, because if they could figure out what was happening right away, there's no need to go through it. But pretty much everyone who decided that they wanted to look through it first did that on every set, even if it was really simplistic and easy to figure out. So one of the other strategies people used to segment the data was creating a scenario. So if they could create a scenario of what was happening, then they could kind of fit their idea of what was going on onto the data they were viewing and break it up that way.
Now he's watching. What? Come on. They're doing something else. Alright, he left the room. What are you guys doing? Alright, I'm going back.
So he interpreted it as, oh, he's coming out, checking out what's going on, and coming back in, and even impersonated his voice, not even knowing what he sounds like. And so it seemed like a very interesting way of coming up with segments by kind of forcing your own scenario on it. And whether that proved to be accurate or not was interesting, because even if it wasn't accurate, they would still kind of keep the same scenario because it already kind of worked for some of the segments. So then it was about 50% of the event boundaries out of all of my participants were from scenarios. I went through and had coded everything depending on how they described them segmenting the activity. And so it might be artificially high, and because the people that are doing the activity obviously know what activity they're